Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, my name is Ariana Elnis. I'm the Communications Specialist for the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska. And Water for Food received a grant from USAID for a Feed the Future Innovation Lab on irrigation and mechanization. Directing the lab will be Nicole Lefore, who has joined me over Zoom graciously to talk about the upcoming project. Thank you so much for joining me today. So Let's go ahead and get started. First, Nicole, there are many people who may not know about innovation labs or what they are. Could you first start with talking a little bit about Feed the Future and the initiative from USAID and the role of innovation labs?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for talking with me today. So the Feed the Future initiative is a U.S. government multi-agency program that overall aims to improve the developing countries' resilience against weather and other types of economic shocks. And through the initiative, they're able to then reduce the need for direct or short-term responses, such as aid to crises. And given the recent crises we've had, we've really seen how this can push people back into poverty or deeper into poverty. So the initiative is really aimed at reducing that backsliding and increasing resilience to shocks. And within that, in fact, really over the past few decades, the U.S. government has provided support for research and development in agriculture to address the root causes of hunger and poverty. And this includes investment in agricultural education and training, agricultural technology development, and working on practices in natural resource management. So effectively, the technologies and practices that will enable smallholder farmers in developing countries to continue to produce safe and nutritious foods and not face catastrophes with extreme weather or other types of market shocks. And the funding for the innovation labs is through Congress in the Farm Bill. And this is research that is led by U.S. colleges and universities, especially land-grant universities like the University of Nebraska. And in addition to reducing the need for aid in the developing countries, data also shows that the investments in global agricultural research brings benefits to the U.S. and particularly to U.S. agriculture, several times over what they invest in the research globally. So it's both beneficial to farmers and consumers in developing countries, but also has benefits back to the U.S. and U.S. agriculture.
Great. So the innovation lab that Water for Food has been granted will work on irrigation and mechanization. Can you talk more about, first of all, what irrigation and mechanization is, and how does that fit into that root cause of poverty and hunger? What areas need it most, and what are some of the goals of that initiative?
Yeah, in developing countries and actually across most of the world, food production actually comes from small farms. In fact, usually less than 5 acres. And the smallholder farmers are almost entirely reliant on rainfall, and in a lot of cases on draft animal or human manual labor for pretty much all farm tasks. But this makes it really difficult to expand the areas under production, and it also means that even the small plots that are under production have quite low yields. So, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, the estimate is that current irrigation is at less than 10% of arable farmland. So even then, on the existing rain-fed farms, we have a lot of, we have a lot of dry land agriculture in the U.S. as well. But there's a lot of water management that needs to be done even in rain-fed farmlands to get through the cropping seasons. So that is the areas where irrigation has huge potential to expand. And even where it may not be irrigation, it's also enhancing how rain-fed agriculture is managed. And there's a lot of push and pull factors right now that are encouraging these smallholder farmers to invest in irrigation and mechanization. We're seeing increased frequency of extreme weather events. In some cases, that might be severe drought. It might be extreme rainfall, and we're seeing issues with drainage. But there's also longer dry spells, so longer times between rains. And if it's at the wrong time, then it affects plant growth. So these types of water insecurities are pushing a lot of smallholder farmers to invest in irrigation themselves. And farmers are also being pulled into irrigation through changes in consumer habits in terms of what people want to eat and what they're able to get access to. So, for example, rice consumption is increasing and the demand for fruits and vegetables is going up. And so farmers are both being pushed into irrigation because of climate change, but also pulled into irrigation and mechanization because they're producing different types of crops and they need to produce those crops year round and not just during the rainy seasons. So we're already seeing an increase in farmer investments themselves, oftentimes very small starts to irrigation. It may be manual irrigation with buckets or watering cans. It often starts with a small pump. But farmers want more information on the range of agricultural water management, how to navigate the transition between rain-fed agriculture or dryland agriculture, as a lot of people call it in the US, as well as irrigation in the dry seasons or in the winter seasons. And we're really just now trying to keep up with the demand for information and technology. In some cases, those technologies and equipment may already be suitable, and it's really an issue of supporting the markets to be able to supply farmers with what they need. But also water availability and water management in agriculture is very local. It's very specific to context. So it means that there's a need for research and also training that's quite specific to a particular place. So we can't always just transfer the knowledge we have from Nebraska or, Vermont to a particular country in another region. So really the aim of this particular innovation lab is to increase the availability of suitable equipment to that local area, and also ensuring that the information on crop water requirements, on mechanization, are appropriate to that particular place. This might be done through supporting market players and industry, but it can also be through local extension services or private extension services as well. And more importantly, we really work with the local institutions and companies in the countries, in the developing countries where we work, to build up local scientific skill and expertise so that the work can carry on after the end of this particular project.
It sounds like there are a lot of variables, like the types of crops, the smallholder farmers, the transfer of knowledge from Nebraska to these different countries, the type of water source. What is the process for choosing where these projects are going to occur?
So Feed the Future as an initiative has priority countries around the world. So they look at issues around where are the high rates of risk for hunger, where are high risk for extreme weather events, but also where is there high potential to develop and to become more self-sufficient in terms of food production. And our project has then looked at that list of Feed the Future countries, and we have selected countries that have a high need for irrigation and mechanization, but also where irrigation can be developed with high impact. and where we will create minimal risk to water resources. So we want to be able to work with farmers and work with local organizations and governments in terms of developing water resources for agricultural water management. But we also want to do that in a way that's sustainable so that we don't create maladaptation or we don't have a long-term negative effect from irrigation development. And our initial countries that we've chosen is Nepal in South Asia, Honduras and Guatemala in Latin America, and in sub-Saharan Africa, we will focus on Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Ghana. But it's also important to mention that, the work has relevance in other countries. It's very specific, but some of the approaches, some of the methods, some of the technologies may be possible to, what they say, scale in other places. And there's also other regions where agricultural water management has some very urgent needs. So maybe Central Asia or other countries in East and Southern Africa. So while we'll have these initial focal countries, it's very possible that over the next 5 years or so that we're likely to expand to some more countries where there's a high demand for irrigation development and mechanization development. But we just aren't including those necessarily in the first initial countries where we'll start.
So we talk about water for food, about water use and growing enough food to feed people. And I think there are some obvious humanitarian reasons for that. But can you talk about how these things like irrigation and mechanization can actually contribute to global stabilization and global security as well?
So as I mentioned, this is one of the priorities of Feed the Future and the Global Food Security Act, or the Global Food Security Strategy that is a U.S. government policy, is really that linkage between the types of investments we put into developing countries and preventing the need for emergency aid. And when we talk about that, we have to have two things that, we kind of keep at the forefront of that discussion. One is that food production may be based strongly on local conditions, but it's also highly interconnected. It's through the markets for inputs or markets for outputs, where the developing countries may get the inputs from global markets, but they may also be selling some of the food products or other agricultural products through global markets. And also that weather and other types of factors may have local impacts, but they can be globally connected. So the other thing then is that water security and food security are interlinked directly. This is something that we see a close relationship between. And those two systems, the water system and the food system, and water security and food security, have become more global than ever before. So just as an example, we think about, climate change, not only extreme conditions such as drought or flooding, but also just the change in the timing or the amount of rainfall. So these long dry spells, and that puts farmers at risk. And if you look, for example, in Central America, so maybe Guatemala or Honduras, crops that have less water than they need at a particular time can become weak, and then they become susceptible to pests and disease. So you have a situation where climate change and the impact on rainfall then affects the plant's susceptibility to pests and diseases, which then can move into other regions. So we've seen cases like that where we have pests and diseases in Latin America that then end up coming up into the US or other regions. So there is this connection between crops, rainfall, and weather extremes, and pests and diseases that can affect agriculture globally. In addition to that, you also have the market factors. So if you look at the same farmers in Honduras or Guatemala, they then might become unable to supply, say, fruits or coffee to the global market at the same quantity or quality that they did in the past. And this may mean that they earn less, and they may even lose their market share entirely because buyers are going to look elsewhere to get that supply. And this can occurs in agriculture anywhere, but in the case of smallholders in developing countries, they can become really vulnerable to these shifts in the market. So then you have a situation where that water security has now affected the household's ability to obtain food or buy food on the market, or also to be able to provide for their own food needs. And then they become food and nutritionally insecure, which in turn can drive political insecurity and instability. So that's how the climate change can affect water security and can affect food security as well. And in another example, in areas of West Africa, particularly for farmers in the Sahel region, they're really experiencing extremes of climate change. Same farmers maybe 30 years ago produced under rain-fed conditions the staple crops that the household needed and to supply the local market. But now with unreliable and erratic rainfall, they're producing less for their own food, but also earning less, which means that they're not able to buy as much food. So there you have a loss of income, a reduction in the basic supply of staples for that next year. And that makes those farmers really vulnerable, including to even extremist political divisions in that region. So there is a direct linkage between water security, food security, and overall political security. And we're more familiar with examples of water being a weapon of war, for example, so destruction of irrigation infrastructure in the Ukraine. But there's a lot of everyday experiences of farmers with water insecurity in agriculture. Not enough water, too much water, poorly timed rainfall, or maybe you get a long dry spell followed by too much rain, like we saw in the Midwest of the US this year. And that drives a loss of income and food security. And those livelihood effects spill over and threaten security more broadly. And this is all to say that investment in agriculture research and development, and particularly agricultural water management and certain forms of mechanization, can really help to build resilience that enable smallholders to continue to produce and supply food, even in the face of certain types of crises. And with that resilience, you not only prevent instability, but you fuel a broader economic growth. That's one of the main goals of the Global Food Security Act, is really agricultural-led economic growth. This is, of course, within long-term management of water and other natural resources, so that we ensure that that food supply and the food security is stable over time and continue to produce and meet food needs in the long term.
Well, I think that this project is a great example of investment in resilience. And I think you mentioned that these innovation labs are typically led by, or always led by, land-grant universities. But can you speak to why Nebraska and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and why the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute specifically was such a great fit for this?
Yeah, I think we have to start just with the state of Nebraska broadly. The state of Nebraska has led a lot of innovation in irrigation and water management to achieve a higher productivity in food production. And this has gone back for decades. Nebraska is where the irrigation industry, the real commercial industry for irrigation, emerged. Nebraska is still home to a lot of irrigation equipment companies, but also companies that produce tools that enable us to monitor water use and to support more precision management of water in agriculture. So some of these companies then have collaborated over the decades with the university system. So University of Nebraska is really well placed because of where they're located and because of that history of collaboration with the irrigation industry and also with farmers in the state. And so through this, the University of Nebraska has expertise on approaches that enable us to address a really wide range of challenges in water management. That may be through more efficient irrigation equipment, It may be the tools needed to monitor water use and to manage water more effectively across an aquifer or in a catchment, but it also extends to innovation systems. So how do you interact with industry and the university system to really create the best of innovation that can support the agricultural industry? And there are really great examples coming from Nebraska for other countries that are just beginning to fully develop irrigation. So through the Nebraska case and through the expertise at the University of Nebraska, we can learn both what not to do for where things haven't always gone well, but also, and more importantly, how to do things better moving forward. I would also want to point out that farmers in Nebraska have been national leaders in the US in regenerative farm practices. And they've really shown what is possible in terms of using technologies, using innovations to create long-term sustainable approaches to food production. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to link what farmers have learned in Nebraska with farmers in developing countries. Even if the size of the farm may be different or the conditions of farming may be different, it's really just learning how to try new innovations and to collaborate and to work together. And also, as I have been learning, the state of Nebraska also serves as a learning example about the rise of women in farm management and natural resource management. Globally, there's an increase in the number of women who are owning farms and who are managing farms. And this is particularly the case in developing countries. A lot of smallholder farmers are women. And I think across both the US and Nebraska, as well as those developing countries, we can learn together about the types of constraints that women farmers face and how they are able to innovate in terms of networking together, in terms of increasing their access to information, overcoming constraints to, for example, credit or access to crop insurance. So I've really been learning a lot from looking at the cases in the US and including in Nebraska. And I think that there's a lot to be learned across the regions about the increasing role of women in agriculture. I think the Doherty Water for Food Institute is really well positioned. They sit in the middle of a lot of innovation between the university, the industry, and agriculture and farmers. And when we combine that with the Institute's global networks and the global leadership that the Institute provides in agricultural water management, we have a lot to offer in research and practice across a wide range of issues that are very relevant to the developing countries.
Great. It sounds like just a perfect mix and a perfect collaboration for this project. And speaking of perfect fits, you are also a great person to lead this project. Could you talk a little bit about your background and what led you here?
And the starting point for me is just growing up on a small farm in Eastern Oregon. I grew up in the Columbia Basin, but in the Walla Walla Valley. And at that time that I was growing up, it was really a rite of passage for a lot of farm kids to change sprinkler pipes and manage the ditch irrigation. So I learned this at a pretty young age. And I'm really most at home in any farm country, whether that's in the US or Ghana or Malawi. I didn't follow the family tradition of farming. I studied agricultural policy at university. And after that, I went to Ghana on a Fulbright fellowship. And I was studying the ways that very remote, very smallholder farmers get access to information and what informs how they choose to do certain types of farming. And that turned into over 20 years of living in sub-Saharan Africa and working in this sector. I've researched and supported policies and programs on anything from how farmers get information and farm inputs during violent conflicts to rural water supply and waterborne diseases. And a lot of my work also focuses on integrating women farmers into irrigation schemes and into the markets. At one point, I led a network of irrigation project managers across 23 countries in Africa, and that gave me a lot of perspective on both the commonalities of water insecurity and food insecurity, but also how solutions need to be adapted and localized. I returned to the US a few years ago to lead the Innovation Lab on small-scale irrigation, which was led by Texas A&M University. And that gave me a tremendous amount of experience in managing research across disciplines and across teams of scientists that are global and work across regions. And as that project ended, I was fortunate to be welcomed into the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at University of Nebraska earlier this year. It's really a privilege for me to be able to work with both farmers and scientists around the world on a topic that means a lot to me. I'm really excited to see this work grow through the new Feed the Future Innovation Lab.
Well, we are very excited as well. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. And we are just so thrilled and excited to start to link the innovations between Nebraska and the rest of the world and create these networks of resiliency and food security around the world. So thank you so much for that work. And thank you so much to USAID and Feed the Future.
Thanks for inviting me. I've enjoyed our discussion.
I have as well. So thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.